Billionaire dared a single dad $1 million to survive one punch. Then her bodyguard begged her to stop. $1 million, server boy. One punch from my bodyguard. Stay standing and the money is yours. Or are you too much of a coward to put food on your daughter's table? The ballroom exploded with laughter. Crystal glasses clinked as some of the richest people in the city settled in to watch the evening's entertainment. To them, I was nobody. Just a waiter in a black catering vest holding a silver tray. I looked at the billionaire, then passed her to the giant standing behind her. You don't want to do this. She laughed. I wasn't talking to her. I was talking to him. The bodyguard smirked at first, rolling his shoulders as he stepped forward. Then his eyes locked onto mine. The smirk vanished. Something in his face just collapsed. The color drained from his cheeks. For a moment, nobody understood what was happening. Then the giant took a step backward. And another. His hands began to tremble. Ma'am. His voice cracked. Please, call this off. The laughter died instantly. 40 of the richest people in the city stared in stunned silence. The bodyguard looked at me again and shook his head. You have no idea who this man is. That was the moment the entire room realized the challenge was never whether I could survive his punch. It was whether he would dare throw it. I'm going to tell you who I really was, why an elite bodyguard would rather lose his job than touch me, and why a broke single father was willing to risk everything for $1 million. But the real story isn't about the punch. It's about what happened after I never had to take it. Before I go any further, if stories like this one are your kind of thing, go ahead and hit subscribe now, because you will not want to miss how this one ends. So let me tell you who I really was. My name is Marcus Reyes. I'm 39 years old. These days I drive a forklift on the night shift, pick up security gigs on weekends, and catering jobs whenever an agency calls. I do whatever keeps the lights on for me and my daughter. But there was a time when people in this city knew my name for a different reason. They called me the Wall. 12 years, undefeated. Not one man ever put me on the canvas. Not once. I want you to understand what that nickname actually meant, because people hear undefeated and they think it's about a hard jaw or thick bones. And it isn't. Anybody can train a body to absorb pain. That's just conditioning. What I had was something underneath that. A thing that simply refused to bend no matter what was coming at it. My old coach used to say some men are born with a basement nobody can find the bottom of. I was one of those men. I could be hurt, badly hurt, and I would still be standing there when the bell rang, because some part of me had already decided falling wasn't an option. Remember that nickname, because a billionaire was about to bet $1 million that her hired bodyguard could do in one swing what 12 years of professional fighters never managed. She had no idea what she was actually offering. Before I tell you about that ballroom, I have to tell you about Danny, because none of what happened that night makes sense without her. Danny never once asked me to stop fighting, even on the months we were counting coins for rent. She used to say, I didn't marry a paycheck, Marcus. I married you. But she also never once asked me to keep going, not even when the money would have made everything easier. The night I came home and told her I was done, that I was walking away at the very top, she just looked at me, and she said, Good. I'd rather raise our daughter with a whole father than a rich one. That was Danny in one sentence. 2 years ago, I lost her. A car accident, the kind that takes everything in for seconds flat and leaves you standing in a hospital corridor with nothing to hit and nothing to fix. All those years of training, all that strength people used to write articles about, and none of it could do one single thing for her. That's the lesson a strong man learns the hard way. There's a whole world out there that strength can't touch. So when I tell you my daughter Ren is everything I have left, understand I mean that with no exaggeration at all. She is 7 years old. She is the last living piece of Danny on this earth. There is no humiliation in this world I wouldn't swallow whole for that little girl, and a ballroom full of rich strangers found that out the hard way. Now let me tell you why I really quit fighting, because I've never told this part the way I'm about to tell it to you. My last fight before the title shot, the one that was supposed to launch me into real money, I fought a kid named Dario. Young, hungry, fast hands, the kind of fighter who reminds you why you fell in love with the sport in the first place. Round 9, I caught him clean with a hook I had thrown 10,000 times in the gym. Routine punch. Except he didn't get up. Not right. There was a stretcher and an ambulance, and for 2 days nobody could tell me if that young man was going to wake up. I sat in that hospital waiting room for 2 days straight. Not allowed back to see him. Just sitting there making promises to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. You can know in theory that what you do is dangerous. Every fighter signs the same papers, takes the same risk, tells himself the other man agreed to it too. But theory doesn't prepare you for watching a mother walk past you in a hospital hallway on her way to her son's bed, and knowing the only reason she's walking that hallway is because of your hands. Hands you spent your whole life training to do exactly what they did. I kept staring down at my own fists those 2 days like they belonged to somebody else. Like I'd been keeping 2 trained animals on a leash, and the leash had finally slipped. Dario woke up on the 2nd day. He lived. He never fought again, but he lived, and I have never in my life been more grateful for anything. Here's the part that changed everything though. While I was sitting in that waiting room those 2 days, terrified I'd ended a young man's life, my wife was 9 months pregnant at home. On the 2nd night, while I was still pacing that hallway, she went into labor. I left one hospital and drove straight to another. I walked out of the worst moment of my life and into the best one in the same 24 hours. A few hours later, the nurse placed my newborn daughter into these same 2 hands. The exact hands that had just put a young man in a coma. These hands that had done so much harm, suddenly holding something so small and so new and so completely trusting. I sat there in that delivery room with Ren against my chest, and I made her a promise out loud, quiet enough that only she and I heard it. These hands are done hurting people, I told her. From this day forward, they hold you, they feed you, they work for you. That's all they do. 1 week later, I called my manager and told him I was walking away from the title shot. He wept on the phone, told me I was throwing away the kind of money that sets up grandchildren. He wasn't wrong. I knew exactly what I was giving up in real dollars, and I did it anyway, because I had looked at those hands holding my daughter and understood with total certainty that I could not be both things. I could not be a man who tries to knock another human being unconscious for money, and also be the man I wanted that little girl to grow up looking up to. One of those men had to die so the other one could live. I have never once regretted which one I let go. Not even on the night $1 million sat on the table in front of me. So that's who I was the night of that party. A widower. A single dad working a catering gig to cover his daughter's school trip. Invisible in a black vest, refilling glasses for people who would never bother learning his name. Vivian Calloway was the host. Real estate and crypto money, the kind of wealth that builds its own zip code. The party was in a house so big they needed a separate staff just to run the kitchen. I'd taken the shift because the pay was solid, and Ren needed a hearing aid her insurance only covered half of, and there was a consult with a specialist I'd been putting off for months because of the bill. I want to be precise about what kind of cruelty Vivian practiced because it wasn't boredom exactly. It was control. She'd built her whole life around the fact that everything bent to her, every room, every employee, every dollar amount, and something in her needed constant proof of that. Cruelty was just how she checked. Started small. Comment about my vest. A joke about the help, loud enough for me to hear, her eyes flicking over to see if I'd flinch. I didn't flinch. I'd been overlooked my whole life, before the fighting and after it. You learn to let words slide off. But I want to be honest with you because this is the part nobody tells you about real restraint. It isn't that the words don't land. They land every time. I'm a human being standing in a room full of people who've decided I'm furniture that pours wine. There was an old part of me, buried but never quite dead, that woke up every time she opened her mouth and wanted to remind that whole circle exactly who they were laughing at. That part of me stayed quiet, not because I'm a saint, because I had a 7-year-old at home, and I was not about to let one bored billionaire's bad night turn me back into a man I had buried years ago. She had me refill her glass 11 times in 20 minutes, watching me each time, looking for the crack. There wasn't one, and that seemed to bother her more than if I had cracked. So she escalated. She set her glass down, turned to her circle of friends, and raised her voice just enough for the whole room to catch it. "You know," she said, smiling at me like I was a clever idea she just had, "you look like you could use some money, sweetheart. Let's play a little game." She gestured behind her, to the man standing at her shoulder the entire night, arms crossed, built like a door frame. "Tiny here is going to hit you, one punch as hard as he wants. You stay on your feet, you survive it clean, no doctor needed, and I write you a check for $1 million right now." The circle laughed. Somebody clapped once like it was already a show. "One punch, server boy." She tilted her head. "Or are you too much of a coward to put food on your daughter's table?" I want to tell you exactly what went through my mind in that moment, because it wasn't pride, and it wasn't fear. It was arithmetic. $1 million. Do you understand what that number means to a man raising a child alone on a forklift wage and weekend catering shifts? It's a hearing aid that actually fits right. It's a specialist visit without doing math on the drive there. It's the difference between telling my daughter "we'll see" and telling her yes. You become fluent in small, grinding refusals when you're a single father stretching one income across a whole child's life. "No, not this month. We'll see. Maybe for your birthday." You get so good at saying no gently that your daughter doesn't feel the weight of it, and you carry that weight alone instead, every single day, smiling while you do it. Ren had asked me that same week if she could go on her class trip to the aquarium. I'd given her the bright voice, the one that means no but doesn't want to sound like it. And here was a woman for whom $1 million was something she'd lose behind a couch cushion, offering me that exact sum to absorb one punch from a man I already knew, with total certainty, could not put me on the ground. To refuse that out of pride would have been the most expensive vanity of my entire life, and my daughter would have been the one paying for it. So I set my tray down on the table, slow, no drama in it. "Okay," I said. "I'll take that bet." The circle erupted. Somebody actually cheered. To them this was the best entertainment money hadn't even had to buy yet, the help finally about to get what was coming to him one way or another. I reached up, undid the top button of my vest, and started rolling up my sleeve. That's when Tiny, who had been smirking this whole time, rolling his shoulders like a man limbering up for batting practice, finally got his first real look at what was underneath that catering uniform. I watched it happen across his face in real time. The smirk went first. Then his eyes moved, from my forearms to my shoulders to the way my weight had settled, without me even thinking about it, into a stance I'd lived inside for 20 years. A real fighter recognizes another fighter the way you'd recognize your own name spoken in a crowded room. It doesn't matter what you're wearing. The body keeps the language even when the mouth forgets it. Tiny's face didn't just change, collapsed. He took one step backward, then another. His hands, which a minute earlier had been ready to throw the hardest punch of his career for a laugh and a paycheck, were trembling now. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice cracked clean down the middle. "Please, call this off." The laughter in that room died so fast it was almost a physical sound. Vivian frowned, annoyed more than alarmed. "Tiny, don't be ridiculous. It's one punch." "You don't understand," he said, and now there was something close to begging in it. "You have no idea who this man is." Vivian crossed her arms, irritated now that her entertainment had stalled. "Who exactly do you think he is, Tiny?" Tiny didn't answer her right away. He was still looking at me, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen on another man's face in over a decade. Not fear of being hurt, fear of what he'd almost let himself become a part of. 12 years ago, he said slowly, like the words cost him something to say, I fought one division up from a guy they called the Wall, undefeated, never been knocked down, not once in his whole career. I went 3 rounds with him in a regional card nobody remembers, and I have never in my life felt power like that man had in his hands. I walked away from that fight with more respect for him than for any man I've ever stood across from. He pointed at me, his arm not quite steady. That's him. That's the Wall standing right there in a catering vest. A couple of the older men in the circle made a sound I can only describe as recognition catching up to memory. One of them actually said my name out loud, the old name, the one nobody in that vest had any business knowing. Vivian's face did something complicated. Confusion first, then something sharper underneath it. "He's a waiter," she said, like saying it again might make it true. "Ma'am." Tiny's voice had gone very quiet now. This man could have ended my career in that ring 12 years ago and didn't even need to try hard to do it. "He's been refilling your glass all night, taking everything you've thrown at him, and not one time has he so much as blinked. Do you understand what that means? It doesn't mean he's harmless. It means he's choosing not to be dangerous. There's a difference, and you have been betting against the wrong one all night." He turned fully toward her now, and his hands came up, not in surrender exactly, more like a man trying to physically hold back a decision he could see his boss about to make. "I will not hit this man," he said. "Not for $1 million of your money, not for my job, not for anything. I'm asking you, please call it off." The room had gone fully silent now. 40 people who'd come for an open bar and gossip were standing frozen around a man in a black vest who 5 minutes earlier they hadn't bothered to look at twice. I want to tell you what was going through my head in that exact moment, because it's the part of the story that actually matters. Every eye in that ballroom was on me, waiting to see what I'd do with the power that had just landed back in my hands. Vivian had spent the whole night trying to make me small in front of her friends, and now the whole room understood I could have ended her bodyguard's career a decade ago without much effort, and could probably do considerably worse to her social standing with a single sentence right now. There's a version of that night where I take it, where I let the silence stretch a little longer than it needs to, just so everyone in that room feels exactly how small they made themselves look. Where I say something cutting to Vivian, quiet enough to be devastating, and walk out with my dignity restored and a story she'd spend years trying to live down. Nobody in that room would have blamed me for it. Half of them would have quietly cheered. But I had made a promise once, in a delivery room, holding a newborn in hands that had just put a young man in a coma. Those hands don't do that anymore. Not even when it's deserved. Not even when an entire room is silently begging me to. So I didn't draw myself up. I didn't let my voice drop into anything that sounded like a threat. I just turned to Tiny first, because he was the one who'd actually done something brave in that room, and I put my hand out. "Thank you," I said quiet, just between the two of us. "What you just did took more guts than throwing that punch ever would have. You're a good man, Tiny." He shook my hand, and I watched this 6'7" professional, a man who'd spent his whole career looking unshakable, blink hard a few times like something had gotten into his eye. "You really don't remember me, do you?" he said, low enough that only I could catch it. "Should I? I had a poster of you on my wall when I was 14. Not because you were flashy, because you never went down no matter what was thrown at you. I needed to believe that was possible for somebody, growing up where I grew up." He shook his head. 12 years later, and I'm the one who almost threw a punch at you for a rich lady's entertainment. Funny how things go. I didn't say anything to that. I just nodded because some things don't need an answer, they just need to be heard. Then I let go of his hand, picked my catering jacket back up off the chair where I'd folded it, and put it back on, slow, no performance in it. I turned to Vivian. "I think I should probably get back to work, ma'am," I said. "Folks need their glasses filled." I want you to understand what that moment did to her, because it wasn't what anyone in that room expected, including me if I'm honest. They expected fear from her or anger or some kind of scramble to save face. What she got instead was a man who could have made her afraid, choosing gentleness in front of everyone who'd ever respected her. I think if I'd threatened her, she would have had something to push against. Anger gives you a place to stand. What I gave her instead was the plain, undecorated truth of who I actually was, and no way to argue with it. Her hands were trembling slightly when she finally spoke. "Wait," she said. I stopped. "I owe you an apology," she said, and her voice had lost every bit of the performance it had carried all night. "A real one. I have treated you abominably since the moment you walked into this house, and you have shown me more grace in the last 5 minutes than I think I have shown another human being in years." The whole circle around her had gone quiet, the kind of quiet where people are recalculating everything they thought they understood about the woman standing in front of them. "And I'm writing the check," she said. "Not because of the bet. The bet's gone, you didn't take a punch, we both know that. I'm writing it because I want to do one decent thing tonight, and because something tells me you'll do something better with that money than I ever have. I want to tell you because I know you're wondering whether I took it. I took every dollar of that check. And I didn't feel 1 ounce of guilt about it, and I'll tell you exactly why. If that money had been about my pride, I would have refused her offer the second she made it and walked out of that house with my dignity intact and my daughter's hearing aids still half paid for. But it was never about my pride. It was about Ren the whole night, every second of it. I had swallowed every insult that woman threw at me for the sake of my daughter's future, and to throw the money back in her face at the end, just to protect my own ego, would have made every minute of that humiliation pointless. A proud man refuses the check. A father takes it. I have never once been confused about which one of those I am. Before she handed it to me, I told her one more thing, because I wanted her to understand exactly what she'd actually paid for. Can I tell you why I really took off that jacket tonight? I said. Not because I needed to prove anything to you or anybody else in this room. I've got a 7-year-old girl at home named Ren. Her mother passed 2 years ago in an accident, and it's just the two of us now. She needs a hearing aid her insurance won't fully cover, and a specialist visit I've been putting off because I couldn't make the math work. $1 million isn't pride to me, ma'am. It's the difference between the life I can give her and the life I want to give her. That's the whole reason I said yes before you even finished your sentence. Vivian put her hand over her mouth and turned slightly away from the circle, and I think it was the first time in a very long time that somebody in her life had told her something true without trying to get anything else out of her for it. I think, in a strange way, that was the kindest thing anybody had done for her that whole night. Not flattering her and not punishing her either. Just standing in front of her as an honest, decent man and letting her measure herself against it. Mercy does something revenge never can. Revenge lets a person stay the villain. They get to feel attacked, defensive, justified in their anger. Mercy takes that away from them. It just holds up a mirror and waits. So what happened after that night? Ren got her surgery consult within the month, and the hearing aid that actually fits right, the good kind, not the kind insurance grudgingly half covers. She went on her aquarium trip with the rest of her class, and came home talking for 2 straight hours about a shark she'd seen up close through the glass. We live in a small house with an actual yard now instead of the apartment we'd been renting for years. I still work. I think I'll always work because I don't know how to be a man who doesn't, but I work now because I want to, not because the wolf is sitting at the door waiting for me to slip. Tiny quit working for Vivian about 2 months later. He told me he couldn't keep standing behind a woman who would have made him throw that punch, even with the apology that came after. I helped him get connected with a gym that trains young amateur fighters, and it turns out he's a natural at it, patient with the kids in a way that surprised even him. He tells them about that night sometimes, about the greatest fighter he ever saw taking off his jacket to absorb a punch for his daughter, then putting it right back on without ever throwing one of his own. He says it's the best lesson he ever learned in this sport. I think he's underselling what he did himself. Refusing his own boss in front of 40 witnesses took its own kind of nerve. But I'm proud to be the story he tells those kids. And Vivian, here's the part one didn't expect. She wrote me a letter a few months after that night. Said it was the first time in years someone had held a mirror up to her without an angle behind it, and that she hadn't liked everything she'd seen in it, and that she'd been trying since to be a different kind of person with the kind of money and power she had. I don't know how far she's gotten with that. People are hard to change, genuinely hard, and I'm not naive enough to think one night fixes a person all the way through. But I believe she meant every word of that letter. And I believe a man choosing gentleness over revenge, just one time, when he had every right to choose otherwise, cracked something open in her that needed cracking. You never really know what a little mercy is going to do to somebody. Sometimes it does more work than a fist ever could have. I think about that night a lot, and what it actually taught me, which was mostly just confirmation of something I already knew deep down but needed reminding of. Everybody in that ballroom thought they understood power that night. They thought it was Vivian's money, or her bodyguard size, or her ability to make a waiter dance for her friend's entertainment. And the most powerful person in that entire house turned out to be the quiet man in the catering vest refilling glasses. My power wasn't in what my hands could have done to that room. It was in choosing, with every single reason in the world not to keep them open instead. The strongest thing I have ever done in my life was not going 12 years without losing a single fight. Any tough kid with fast hands and a hard chin can learn to do that. The strongest thing I ever did was hold my newborn daughter in hands that had just put a man in a coma and decide, right there, never to throw another punch in anger again, and then keep that promise for years, even on a night a whole room full of cruel, wealthy strangers would have cheered me for breaking it. That's the real win. Not knocking somebody down. Having every ability to do it and choosing love instead. That night, after I finally got home, I paid the babysitter, and I went and stood in the doorway of Ren's room for a while, just watching her sleep the way you do when you need to remind yourself what all of it is actually for. I had that check folded up in my jacket pocket, and I thought about everything it was about to unlock for her, the whole future it had just cracked open. But mostly I just looked at her small face in the dark and thought about the promise I'd made the same hands that were holding that check years ago, in a different room, holding her for the very first time. I walked in quiet, pulled her blanket up under her chin, gentle as anything, with hands that are never going to hurt another person again. She stirred a little, half asleep, and mumbled, "Daddy, I'm here, baby," I said. "Go back to sleep. Everything's good." And it was. For the first time in a long while, everything actually was. So here's what I want to ask you before I let you go. We've got this idea, most of us, that strength is about how much you can do to people, how hard you can hit, how much you can make the world bend to you. But I've come to believe the realest strength a person can have is the strength to not. To have the power to hurt somebody and choose, anyway, not to use it. To have every right to revenge and choose mercy in its place, even when nobody would blame you for choosing otherwise. So tell me in the comments, when have you seen somebody show that kind of strength? The kind where holding back cost them more than lashing out ever would have. Or when did you manage it yourself, on a night nobody would have blamed you for letting go? Those are the stories I actually want to hear. Those are the real champions.